Let's talk with attorney Rothenberg. He is actually just let me just bring him on, man. I'm gonna do his long introduction, but he has been working here with us, the Progressive Army, with different shows and just giving us a lot of different advice. And he came to me about the protests that are going to happen in Philly. There are a lot of protests that are outlined in Philly. And the truth of the matter is, I don't think a lot of people understand it, because I don't understand all of my rights and all of the things that I can assert. So first of all, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what tell us a little bit about what you want to achieve with this crash course.
Thank you for having me on, first of all. But the most important thing that I'd like to achieve is that people can protest. It's their right to protest. And if they get arrested, no one is harmed. But most importantly, that people are aware of their rights, these constitutional rights that they do have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely, and we definitely appreciate it, because I think it's something people need to know. We're all headed down to Philly. I'm headed down on Saturday, and I know a lot of people are going on Saturday and Sunday. So there's going to be a lot of protests. So what are our rights in terms of protesting? What are the limitations to those rights? And then we'll talk about what happens if we get arrested after that.
Okay, first I want to start off, I'm going to explain the procedure and what happens and what your rights are, but the most important thing is for everyone to realize that realistically, the police are not going to have the manpower to accommodate all of these rights at the same time. So most likely, more likely than not, they're going to basically abate these rights completely. But in that regard, the most important thing to understand is that there's a big distinction between being detained by a police officer and being arrested.
Mm-hmm.
If you're being detained, it's basically like the police officer asking you certain questions, and you essentially feel like you can't leave if you wanted to. At that point in time, you have the right to ask of the police officer whether or not you are free to leave.
Mm-hmm.
If he says that you're not free to leave, at that point, you have to assume that most likely you're going to be under arrest.
Mm-hmm.
Now, everyone watches TV and they see the police officer do the Miranda rights. That only comes into play in certain circumstances. So if they're not going to take a statement from you, they don't really have to read you your rights at that point if essentially you're not being arrested completely. But at that point, if you feel like you're being arrested or you're about to be arrested, the most important thing you can do is immediately ask for an attorney. They can no longer question you once you have asked for an attorney. In addition to that, it's very important, do not say anything. Do not try to negotiate. Do not try to sit there and appease to the officer's sense of liberty and whatnot. He doesn't care, and he's going to use everything that you're saying against you. So that's extremely, extremely important. Immediately, if you get arrested, ask for an attorney. Before that, though, if, let's say, you're being detained by the police officer, there's a good chance that he's going to ask you if he can pat you down. You have a right to say no.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, what you need to specifically say is, I do not consent for a search. I do not consent for you to touch me in any of these circumstances. I want to say another thing. I should have started off with this, but despite how angry people might be, it's best to try and be as courteous with the officer as you can, because essentially it's going to be your word versus his, and it's better if you're recording something, whatever it might be, that he has nothing to say. He can't say you resisted. He can't say that you were being disruptive or you disobeyed any of his orders. So it's hard to do, I understand, but just be very courteous in those scenarios. Getting back to what to do in that scenario, if the cop detains you, you can say, why am I being detained? Now, at this point, he might not have anything or any valid reason to detain you, and it's called reasonable suspicion. In order for him to detain you, he has to have this level of reasonable suspicion. But again, due to the size of the protests, none of these rules are going to be abided by. So it's sad, but it's true. So if you happen to say, why am I stopped, or why are you asking me questions, whatever it might be, don't at all allow him to say, well, why do you think I stopped you? Anything in that circumstance. You don't want to give anything away.
Right.
You basically need to know that he has a right to ask you a question. You have a right to say, am I free to go? If he says no, that means that you're going to be placed under arrest. If you're placed under arrest, you have a right to request an attorney. Now, the officer's going to try and talk to you if you get arrested and say, listen, just tell me this, tell me that. No matter what it is, I'm going to let you go. Don't say anything. Every time he says a question, I want my attorney.
Right.
Which, beyond your name and maybe your address, because they're going to find that out anyway. But beyond that, I want an attorney. I want to speak to an attorney. I want to speak to an attorney.
So let me jump in there real quick, Michael, and ask some specific questions, because you said it twice, something that's very important, that at events of the magnitude that we're getting ready to go into in Philly, with thousands upon thousands of people and limited manpower, it's very likely that the police officers will not recognize some of the basic principles and procedures and rights and that we would expect in a normal encounter. And so is that why we saw in Baton Rouge, and we saw in Ferguson, we saw in Baltimore, where without saying anything, they go directly to arrest someone and detain someone? Help us understand how that happens, and what do you do in that type of scenario?
Well, it's funny. We're lucky the convention's in Pennsylvania, because in certain states, criminal law is different by state. In Pennsylvania, you actually have a right to record a police officer in his official capacity. So that means, I was in New York at the protest, and one of the first things the police officers were saying was, turn off your phone, stop recording. Mm-hmm. No one should do that in any case, but they don't have the right to tell you that. But in Pennsylvania, you're allowed to record whatever they're doing. So as in the other states, what you were referring to, it just basically rights and procedures went out the window, again, because of the threat and the magnitude. But in that scenario, if your rights are completely going out the window, you need to do your best to record whatever's going on. So something I would suggest is, if you feel you're going to be under arrest, take your cell phone, whatever your device might be, put it in your jacket pocket or a pocket where it will be able to pick up your voice and narrate very calmly what's going on. I am not resisting arrest. I am doing whatever you say, this, that, the other. I am interlocking my fingers behind my head. Whatever you feel is, or whatever you are observing in that scenario, just narrate. If the cop's being aggressive, discuss it, provide details. Because later on, that's going to be your only evidence in any way, shape, or form. Because other than that, it's your word versus the officer's word. And people are going to believe.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So let's go into some more specifics then. So at what point do the police officers just move to arrest? Like, in my mind, like every time I see mass arrests, I'm like, okay, they must have given some order that was not acquiesced to, or are they simply there and now they're shutting the protests down? Like, what actions will these protesters likely do to cause their arrest?
Well, that's the thing. These are very different protests than have ever been had before in certain regards, because it's this many people unified. So even if you're not being obstructive, or you're not protesting violently, or you're not bothering anybody, I honestly do believe that to an extent the cops are just going to be intimidated by the sheer amount of people, and they're going to just start taking people away with the zip tie plastic bands that they use and putting them on a bus, and that's it. So, but the most important thing in that type of scenario, even if they give an order to that, you need to stop doing this, you need to stop doing that, essentially do it. You're not helping anybody by getting arrested, and you're definitely not helping anybody by getting harmed. So, again, I don't believe that they're going to follow the normal protocol saying cease, desist, this is an unlawful protest, whatever it might be. But you do have a right to protest, and you do have a right to be there, as long as you're not obstructing anything, or that you're not blocking the streets, things of that nature, essentially.
So we can already assume, right? I know there's a lot of permitted protests, but there are going to be some unpermitted protests that just spark off. There are going to be disruptions. People are going to block some traffic. So they're going to, they're going to do all of this. So in those in those types of protests, we can just guarantee you're going to be arrested, right?
Yeah.
So once you're arrested, you're taken to jail. You're taken to the station, or you're put in there, just sitting inside of their van for a few hours, which I read happened in Baton Rouge last week. What happens next, and how do they, if they're in Philly, they're just in Philly for enough time for this convention, how do they get out and get home?
Okay. First, I want to take a step back. You should go to the protest with somebody. You should exchange cell phone numbers, and you should try to keep an eye on each other so everyone could be in contact if something does happen. Also, it's very important, try to take 2 forms of ID if you can, and some change so you can make a call, because odds are they're not going to let you use your cell phone if you do get arrested. Try not to have anything that you don't need on you, whether it be anything that's not necessary to be there, because that's going to give them an excuse to try and arrest you. And plus, if they do arrest you and they find something that shouldn't be there, it's going to just make any charge worse. But while you're sitting, you could actually be sitting there for up to 6 hours. But during that process, immediately the first thing you say is, I want my attorney. That sets off a certain trigger that they can no longer question you about anything related to that. Very important that you don't sit there and talk to other people, because they can listen in. When you have your right to call the attorney, be very careful of what you say, because again, the police officers can record almost anything that goes on in the cell or the jailhouse, whatever it might be. But the most important thing to do is try to get a few numbers of attorneys or people that will be down there. I have a number for the ACLU of Pennsylvania. It's 877-745-2258. And there's also another organization that's specifically set up for the protest. It's called Up Against the Law Collective. Their number's 484-758-0388. So if you don't have an attorney specifically, reach out to one of those people.
Yep.
Other than that, you're going to just have to wait there till they process you or release you with a desk ticket appearance. Again, don't say anything. Don't try to say, I was only doing this, I was only doing that. You have a right to not say anything. You have a right to not say anything you don't want. Even when the officer detains you before arrest, if he asks you questions that you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer. You have a right to not respond. Odds are he can try to manipulate that into some sort of suspicion, but you have a right to be silent. You have a right to not incriminate yourself. You have a right to have an attorney during any portion after the arrest.
All right, Michael. So this is the crash course. You provided us a lot of valuable information that some of the people going may not have been aware of. So I want to thank you for that. Give us the. I want you
If
to.
there's any other questions, let me know.
Yeah. So a couple things that I want you to do before I let you go. I want you to get the last word, and as you're giving us your last statements, I want you to give us the number one thing out of everything. If they don't remember anything else, what's that one thing that they should remember? And then last but not least, tell them how to get up with you if they have questions.
Okay. The most important thing to remember is that you have a right to be there. So whether they tell you you don't have a right, you have to leave, you have to do this, you have to come with us, you need to remember that right. And remember to be there, and don't give them any reason to want to arrest you, whether it be protesting overly angrily, whatever it might be. But you're there for a reason and for a cause, and try to have fun doing it and not get harmed. That's the most important thing. And if anyone needs to get in touch with me, you can contact me at my cell phone, 516-996-3278, on my Twitter account, which is REEL Rotation 27. And again, it's my pleasure to assist in any way possible. So thank you for having me.
Hey, my pleasure, Michael. We'll definitely have you back on whenever we can. And just quick question. Now, all the time we've been talking, I never asked you, are you going to Philly next week?
I'm most likely going.
All right, so we'll see you there.
I want to be there just in case anything happens,
Yeah, absolutely, because I have your cell phone number. I'll be calling you if I get snatched up on the side of the road. Thanks so much for joining me, man. We'll catch you next time.
All right, no problem.
857-600-0518 is the number to join in if you want to join the conversation. So yeah, just some basic, some things to keep in mind. some things that these are things that you're likely not going to remember in the heat of the moment, which even if you know all of this and you knew all this, you need to write it down, because there's a good chance some of this you're going to forget. The intimidation factor is huge, right? So the fact that in Pennsylvania you do have the right to record, and I think that's a huge thing to keep in mind.